Hello everybody. Today I would like to talk to you about The Dark mono blue deck. I constructed this deck specifically for the tournament run by Timmy the Sorcerer himself. It was a really fun tournament with unique metagame, and it's like nothing else that you played before because it's a unique tournament and people didn't even know what the metagame would be. It's even different from your singleton events, it's different from budget events, because even there you would usually know what kind of best spells you will have. You will have lightning bolt, souls to plowshares, you will have counter spells, you will have Mishra's factories, you know, all the things that people would normally expect and all the things that will usually shut down some suboptimal strategies. But here it's entirely different because people didn't know what the metagame would be. We would usually know what kind of cards the set has, but it was unpredictable. But this allowed me to play some of the cards that I would never put into any other deck usually, and the tournament itself was a blast. I met some of the old friends and the new friends in the amazing community on the Discord server run by Timmy, and I just had a blast, really. So let me tell you about the deck itself. Let's go through it. First of all, the mana base. This deck is incredibly mana hungry, and not only is it mana hungry, but it's also island hungry. So I had 24 islands, 4 Velver Stones, and Apprentice Wizard, as you see here, also did contribute to some mana. And remember, in this format there is very little removal, so very often you would hope that creatures that you cast will stay there for some time and you will be able to use them. So speaking of creatures, first of all we have got Waterworm, and it's one of those cards that I had for collection, one copy of these, and I would never think that I would use it, but it's a really good card actually. In this one, 1 for 1, especially because we have got Sunken Cities, is not negligible, so I just ordered myself 3 more copies because it's not a bad card. However, I did not face any blue decks, and again, let's talk briefly about the metagame. So when this tournament was announced, I was really excited because it's one of my favorite sets. I will make a video soon where I talk about my favorite expansions in 93-94. The Dark will certainly be not on the last place there, even though it is a strange set for sure. But when this was announced, I started thinking to myself, so alright, what are the good and powerful cards in the Dark? And the first thing that comes to my mind is that a mono-red build would be viable. You've got lightning, not lightning bolt, ball lightning. You have got also Brothers of Fire, Sisters of Flame. You have got Inferno, Fisher. So a lot of cards that are quite good. Also, let's not forget the goblins, right? So I think it's not a terrible choice. Yes, mono red. So I really was thinking about running this. Also remember that in white we have Preacher, which is an amazing card. There isn't much removal, but Preacher can take over the whole army. So I was thinking about that. But then I said to myself, okay, so probably this is the only tournament where I can actually expect to run a Leviathan and cast it and also attack with it. And I was not wrong, actually. I did use Leviathan, but about Leviathan we'll talk a little bit later. So, okay, getting back here. Waterworm, yeah, that's alright. Merfolk Assassin. Merfolk Assassin has this ability of destroying creature with Island Walk, and of course there is a combo. You probably know what I'm talking about. 1/2 for 2 blue mana is not amazing, but again, let's remember there are no Mishra's factories, and sometimes you may expect this guy to trade with others, especially if we use Sunken City. So it's not a terrible card, it's not perfect either, but it is something that I included and I don't regret doing that. Apprentice Wizard. Apprentice Wizard is very interesting because he gives you 3 colorless mana, so that's +2 mana every turn. The problem is that we don't really have a lot of use for that. We have quite a lot of blue mana that we require, also for upkeep costs sometimes, and yeah, this is a separate topic that I'm going to talk about all in by itself in this particular deck, that this deck does require quite a lot of blue mana during the upkeep and such. So Apprentice Wizard, yes, 0/1, 0/1, but then again it wasn't something that I had to fear, because with the exception of Brothers of Fire, and even then they would deal 1 damage to the opponent as well, these guys could usually leave, and I needed them to cast a very important spell on turn 4, which I even sometimes did. Next, let's talk about Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship is, of course, a very beautiful card, just the art itself. If we look at the sails in the form of ghosts, I'm not sure if you noticed this, maybe you did. Tom Wannerstrand, not sure how to pronounce the name, sorry, is a master of drawing ships. He has a skeleton ship from Ice Age, which is definitely one of my favorite pieces of art in Magic. So yeah, talking about the card itself in terms of gameplay, 2/4 for 4 mana, flying and regeneration for 3 blue. It's a really good deal actually, especially for the dark. And in terms of flying creatures, you have got what? You have got Fire Drake, you've got Ghost Ship. Maybe there is something else, but I cannot actually remember whether there is. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe there is Whippoorwill? Or is Whippoorwill from another set? I don't remember, doesn't matter. Anyway, this is the best flying creature in this set, and this was definitely fearsome. Very often it was a target for my Dance of Many. So, next, we have got quite a useless card, if you just look at it. But in reality, 4/4, 7 mana, regeneration for 3 mana, with the mana acceleration that we had from Felver Stones and Apprentice Wizards. It was actually nice. Only 1 copy. Maybe, if I had more, I would have put even 2 copies. So this was actually quite a good card. But, of course, the star of this deck is Leviathan. As I said, this was my main rationale for building this deck, for choosing the blue color, and it's just such an iconic card. 9 mana, 10/10 trample. 10/10 trample. I remember discussions of more than 20 years ago when I talked to my friend, and I just introduced him to Magic, and we were teenagers, and I was explaining to him that this is a quite useless card, that, you know, some early cards such as Land of War Elves on turn 1 is more useful than Leviathan, because you probably will not leave until Leviathan. And I was talking to him about how this is actually not a very expensive card in terms of money, because it does pretty much nothing. But of course he was really excited about this card, and yeah, so was I, and so am I even today about the card itself. I just love it. Look at it. He is trying to eat this whole tower. I'm not sure where it is happening. Is it some kind of an underwater city? Is he actually flying? Probably not. But yeah, Leviathan, 3 copies. I did manage to cast it. I did manage to untap with it. And it's just an amazing feeling of going all in. When you sacrifice your islands, you know that you will be left with nothing. But in a couple of turns, in a couple of attacks, again, he has trample, you will probably win. So amazing, really amazing. Next, let's talk about non-creatures. We have got Flood, and you know, I'm still on the fence about whether this card was useful or not, or whether I should have moved it to my sideboard, because I felt that I maybe lost a couple of games because of it. So what it does is quite good on paper. For 2 blue mana, you tap target non-flying creature. And let's remember once again that in this sub-format, there aren't many flying creatures. Almost none. So I said to myself, okay, it's going to be good. But the problem is that it is going to be good only against mid-range decks. And we had a lot of aggro decks. We had mono red, we had red and white, we had black and green. And all of these decks had some fast and powerful creatures. Not always powerful, but still, they could just take you by the size of the army. And I had 3 copies. The problem is that if you cast it turn 1, then your opponent will cast some creature, you tap it, then they will cast some more creatures, you will have some more mana. But the problem is that while they are developing their army and while they're developing something, you are doing nothing. You are just spending all this mana. You might have 6, 8 mana to tap 4 creatures, but then there is nothing that happens. And then, when you are finally ready to play some of your creatures, some of your spells, you don't use this mana to tap your opponent's creatures with Flood, and then as a result they will be able to attack you for a lot of damage. So I don't know, maybe this should have been moved to sideboard. Because even in the very interesting and useful case where I could just tap my opponent's Ball Lightning, this way it wouldn't deal any damage, I still didn't have enough mana, because you choose what to do with this deck. There are a lot of decisions to make, and you can do everything. So you have to play very carefully, you have to take your risks, you have to take a look at the deck you're playing against, so a lot of decisions. Sunken City is a nice card, 2 cards in the main deck, 2 cards in the sideboard. It is a bad moon. You see what I did there? It is just a bad moon or bad crusade, because you have to pay 2 blue during your upkeep. And I did have quite a lot of creatures, as you can see, and this didn't usually benefit my opponent because I didn't see any blue decks, as I said. So I don't know, it's a good card, but here comes the very interesting thing in this deck. As I said, it is mana hungry and island hungry. You will even have to sacrifice islands, and it just makes me think once again about how beautifully the game of Magic was designed right from the start. So it goes upkeep and then draw phase. This means that you should decide whether to pay the upkeep cost before you know what your card is. And I had this very interesting case where I would have Amnesia in my hand and 5 mana, and then I had Sunken City, Dance of Many, and I didn't know what the next card would be. And I could gamble and see whether it's an island or not. I could gamble hoping that this would be an island, so I would be able to cast Amnesia next turn. Sorry for the jump cut. So yes, once again getting back to this idea of having to plan carefully when to pay upkeep costs, when not to pay them. So, you know, it's interesting because I've got a couple of combos here in this deck. I've got some interesting synergy, but at the same time the mana base and also the upkeep costs are not ideally balanced. Let's talk about Dance of Many itself for a while. You know how I love this card. I featured it in a couple of my decks. I really enjoy it. I think that sometimes it might be more useful than Clone, but then again, it is up to you to choose what to run and how many copies. Here we had no choice of the Clone, of course, so I used Dance of Many to sometimes copy my opponent's creature. Again, remember that it can act as pseudo removal. But speaking of my own creatures, I would often clone Ghost Ship, and when I had Sunken City in play, this would be a fearsome argo through 5 flying creatures. So that's quite good. Now, another important card, and the second card that made me play blue, is Amnesia. Amnesia, as you can see, is a card that makes your opponent discard all of their hand except for lands. And this is devastating. Remember that in this format you haven't got any Moxen, you haven't got any other fast and powerful cards, and basically almost no mana acceleration. So this means that by turn 4, where we're usually able to cast this card with the help of Apprentice Wizard, this did happen sometimes, the hand would still be quite full, I would say. So this will make your opponent discard 3 or 4 cards, and this is incredibly devastating. So I run 4 copies. This idea came to me because I remember that there is this Turbo Amnesia deck. It's not a high profile deck, but it can run Mana Vault, and of course some other mana acceleration. You can use different colors for that, and casting Amnesia would be very nice, but then again, in this particular format, it was a really powerful and devastating card. Next, we have got War Barge. Obviously, it is a card that I use with the combo with Merfolk Assassin. War Barge, Merfolk Assassin, one of those famous combos, was even reprinted in Time Shifted, both of these cards. Destroying the creature that has Island Walk, and with this one you give Island Walk to your opponent's creature for 3 mana. And there are also some combinations with using Boomerang, but it's not available here in the dark. It is quite a nice combo. You aren't often able to pull it off, but also your opponents will usually know that you're ready to do that, so I haven't been able to actually use it a lot, but it's still a nice idea. And no, War Barge was not useful against my opponents because nobody played blue, so I couldn't use it to give my own creatures Island Walk. Next, there is one very interesting card, Psychic Allergy. It's one of those cards that were in my binder for a very long time. I didn't take it out of the binder. I just said, okay, it's here for the purpose of collection. Look, this is a portrait of Dorian Gray. Some allusion to that, if you haven't noticed. So what does it do? 5 mana, quite a lot. Choose a color, and during the opponent's upkeep, they have 1 damage for each permanent of the chosen color. Again, I thought that in this particular sub-format, a lot of people are going to have mono-colored builds, which they did, quite a lot, and also there were a lot of permanents. So this would usually deal 4 or 5 damage, and you can imagine that this is a lot, especially in the format with very, very little direct damage possible, and no direct damage possible for blue as far as I'm aware. So the upkeep cost is really steep. You have to sacrifice 2 islands, and this doesn't work well with other cards, but as a finisher it was very powerful and fearsome. Next, let's briefly talk about Sideboard. Many cards were just there because, well, you don't have a lot of choice, and they were pretty useless. There is Skull of Worm, which is fine if you can bring back your enchantment, if you want to bring back your enchantment, such as Dance of Many, Sunken City, Flood, Psychic Allergy. But guess what? There is no enchantment removal in the format, so this is absolutely useful. Why would you bring back that? Maybe just Dance of Many, using it for pseudo removal. I still never brought it in. Next, Reflexive Mirror. Again, a very interesting idea. You can redirect basically a spell. X is twice the casting cost of target spell, which is a lot again, right? This ability is played as an interrupt. Basically, your opponent plays, let's say, Lightning Bolt. You pay 2 mana and redirect this to your opponent. Well, the first problem is that your opponent will be aware that you have this, and they will be usually to play around it. That's number 1. And number 2 is that in the dark there are no spells that this can be used against. Well, maybe Amnesia, but are you going to have 12 mana? If you have 12 mana, will you have enough cards for your opponent to cast Amnesia? Probably not. It would have been good against Eternal Flames, but listen, it's very interesting that Eternal Flames targets an opponent, and you cannot do that because the caster of this will only be able to target the opponent, and they will not be an opponent to themselves, so it even doesn't work against that, which is a pity because it would have been a useful case. Needless to say, I didn't use this card ever. I did use Sunken City in the aggro plan. So in some matchups I decided to go for the aggro plan. I had to take the bigger creatures, I had to take away some of my interesting synergies because I just saw that the opponent has a lot of fast, powerful creatures, and I just said to myself, okay, we have to go all in on small creatures. And I had electric eels, which I wasn't able to pump, so it's just a 1/1 for 1 damage for 1 blue mana. That's terrible. Sometimes I could hope to have 2 Felber Stones and my opponent had mountains, but it still never happened, unfortunately. But electric eels, nice. Again, as I said, playset of water worms will be nicer, and more electric eels. So believe it or not, but this was actually viable because we would have 2-3 Merfolk Assassins, 2 guys like that, Ghost Ship, even bigger Apprentice Wizards 1, 2, or maybe 2, 3, depending on how many cities we have. So this was a viable plan actually. Giant Shark, an iconic card, never used it. Rune Sword, in case you don't know the story, there is the hairy one and the hairless one. Or, oh wait, that's actually my hair. Okay.